My name's Josh. We're here at Yestermorrow Design Build School in Warren, Vermont. I'm the 2011 Kitchen Garden Intern, and so I'd like to show you all around the gardens here at Yestermorrow Design Build School. Well, here we are at the main garden here at Yestermorrow. This is where we grow most of our veggies for the kitchen. Um, as you can see, they're all raised beds, and we're growing a lot of greens this year. You can see in front of you some mesclun mix, some spinach, arugula, beet greens, a whole medley of different things, a cornucopia one might say. Um, and we're doing also some innovative things. We're intercropping some perennials such as these strawberries along with these asparagus to try to move to a perennial form of gardening. If we come down here, we can also see some other interesting gardening techniques that we're embarked upon. In total, we have about 1/8 of an acre under production at Yestermorrow, which means things can be kind of tight when we're trying to grow as much food as possible. So we end up doing a lot of intercropping or planting two crops in the spot where one would normally go. Here you can see peas growing next to tomatoes. And the ideal is that as these peas grow and mature, we harvest the peas, cut them back in just enough time for the tomatoes to really take off and fill in that empty space. And the benefit of having these two together is that peas fix nitrogen in the ground while tomatoes are heavy feeders of nitrogen. Here we are in another part of the main garden, and I'd just like to show you all some of the other interesting things we're doing here. Here we're growing 3 crops in the space that one crop would normally grow. We have kale growing here, and interplanted within this kale is some scallions. And then also underneath those scallions are Dutch white clover. And there's multiple benefits from growing these 3 crops in this way. For example, the Dutch white clover fixes nitrogen and acts as a living mulch, so it retains moisture while fixing nitrogen. The scallions, some people say that onions are, they confuse pests when they come up against that onion-like smell, so they potentially deter pests. And also they're a quick crop compared to kale, so they'll come up, we'll harvest them, and then the kale will really fill out in those spaces. Over here, another interesting thing we're doing is in between these long rows we're planting what I learned to call bio-islands. Essentially islands of biodiversity, predominantly with flowers. This right here is Japanese buckwheat, and this will flower and pull in a lot of beneficial pollinators and habitat for beneficial insects. And we have flower gardens all the way down until the trellises. So creating a break in our gardens to deter pests from really spreading and also to increase habitat for beneficial insects. And one last thing behind us, that tube right there is floating row cover or remay, and that we're using to deter pests such as pests like woodchucks or deers, but also pests like flea beetles, or in this case, these are cucurbits, zucchinis and cucumbers. Is to deter cucumber beetles and squash bugs. Another very important element of gardening here at Yestermorrow is the chickens we have. We have a total of 19 chickens now at Yestermorrow, all 18 laying hens and 1 rooster. And let's see if we have some eggs. All of our hens free range within a movable pasture. They have access to ample amount of grasses, natural vegetation, along with some organic lane pellets that we feed them to supplement their diet. They're outside all day, and we close them up at night. And we think we provide them with a safe, hospitable environment where they can grow and thrive. bring these to the kitchen for the meal plan. Here we are at yet another garden at Yestermorrow Design Build School. This is what we lovingly call the edible forest gardens. And if anyone's familiar with permaculture, it's a concept of interplanting perennial species to create a fertile habitat. And the land before these forest gardens were here is very marginal land. It's basically entirely sand. So our big project has been reclaiming extremely marginal land and creating a habitat for gardens to grow on. One specific example is these miniature swales that we dug. Classes here at Yestermorrow came and dug swales, which are essentially just ditches, mounted up the dirt downhill and planted into that dirt. Essentially water running downhill will collect in those ditches and feed the gardens on these hills. We also mulched inside of those ditches to retain moisture and planted a variety of species that add many beneficial aspects to this garden. For example, this plant here is a astragalus. It's a nitrogen-fixing ground cover. It'll grow out, vine, and die back, in the process pumping nitrogen into the soil. Other crops planted in here are some Welsh onions, which are perennial onions. They'll grow and multiply each year. Some dwarf comfrey or flowering comfrey, which is a dynamic accumulator. It'll pull up a lot of unique, not heavy metals, unique metals and micronutrients from the subsoil and bring them to the surface. We have a josta berry for some edible fruits, and we also have some clover seeded in here for more nitrogen fixation. Along with this garden, we have many other examples of edible forest gardens, such as fruit trees interplanted with comfrey, with strawberries, with ground covers such as Dutch white clover. Just a whole plethora of great examples of good design. Here we are at our final garden, our herb garden, which feeds our kitchen located just right behind you. I'm going to show you all some of our perennial herbs we got growing here for the kitchen. We have some chives, which are flowering very beautifully. We have next to them some garlic chives. Further along we have some sage, which is right here. Some Johnny Jump Ups, which contain edible flowers. We have some oregano growing with some mint, kind of growing wild. Further down we have some parsley planted in here, more sage, some rosemary, and then at the very end here we have some French sorrel that we planted this year. And this is a perennial green that will come up in early spring. And we can harvest the leaves for a bitter but lemon-tasting green to add to salads and soups. This year we filled up our garden with perennial herbs in the hopes that we won't need to plant as much in the subsequent years. So, thank you for joining me on this tour of the Yestermorrow Gardens, and we hope to see you soon.